It is in your kitchen right now. You bought it yourself. You probably bought it because the label said it was good for your heart. Maybe it said light. Maybe it said natural. Maybe it had a picture of a sunflower or a green field or a smiling family on the front, and you brought it home, and you cooked with it, and you fed it to the people you love. What nobody told you, what the label never mentioned, is what that oil does inside your arteries after every single meal, not over decades. After every single meal, there is a specific chemical reaction that begins within hours of consuming this oil. A reaction that generates free radicals, triggers arterial inflammation, and accelerates the biological aging of your cardiovascular system in ways that researchers are only now beginning to fully document. And the most disturbing part, the science exposing this has been available for over 20 years. The oil is still on your supermarket shelf. It is still being marketed as healthy. It is still in most kitchens, including, very likely, yours. Today I am going to name it. I'm going to show you exactly what it does inside your body, specifically, after the age of 50, when your arteries are already working harder than they were at 30, and I am going to give you 3 oils that clinical research now confirms are not just safe, but actively protective for the aging cardiovascular system. Stay with me, because what you cook with is not a small decision. It never was. Let us go back to 1961. A researcher named Ansel Keys published a study that would reshape the dietary guidelines of the entire Western world for the next 6 decades. His conclusion was simple: saturated fat. The fat found in butter, animal products, and traditional cooking oils caused heart disease. The solution, therefore, was to replace it. Replace it with what? With the newly developed, industrially produced vegetable and seed oils that the food industry had been waiting for an opportunity to mainstream. Soybean oil, corn oil, canola oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, cottonseed oil, cheap to produce, long shelf life, easy to bottle, easy to market, and now with the backing of a landmark scientific study and the dietary guidelines that followed it, suddenly healthy. Governments endorsed it. Doctors recommended it. Food manufacturers reformulated every product on the shelf to feature it. And an entire generation, your generation, was raised to believe that the bottle of vegetable oil in the kitchen was one of the better choices they could make for their heart. Here is what has emerged in the decades since. Ansel Keys's original study cherry-picked its data. Of the 22 countries whose data was available to him, he used 7. Specifically the 7 that supported his conclusion. The other 15 were omitted. This was not a small methodological error. It was the foundation of a nutritional framework that influenced what billions of people ate for 60 years. And the oils that replaced saturated fat, a 2013 meta-analysis published in the British Medical Journal, reanalyzed the original data from the Sydney Diet Heart Study, and found that replacing saturated fat with linoleic acid, the primary fatty acid in most vegetable oils, was associated with significantly increased rates of death from cardiovascular disease and all causes, not decreased, increased. The replacement was worse than what it replaced. And the people who made that switch, who faithfully followed the guidelines, who threw away the butter and bought the vegetable oil, were not protected. They were harmed, not quickly. Not dramatically, slowly, quietly, one meal at a time. The oils I am talking about are called polyunsaturated seed oils, specifically, and I want you to write these down: soybean oil, corn oil, canola oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, grapeseed oil, vegetable oil, which is almost always a blend of the above. These oils share one critical characteristic that makes them uniquely damaging in the aging body. They are chemically unstable at heat. When you heat these oils, which is what you do every time you cook with them, their molecular structure breaks down. They oxidize. They produce compounds called aldehydes, lipid peroxides, and advanced glycation end products, AGEs, that have been directly linked in peer-reviewed research to arterial inflammation, cellular aging, and the progressive stiffening of blood vessel walls. Let me say that in plain language. Every time you fry, saute, or roast with these oils, every time they reach cooking temperature, they are generating compounds inside your pan that, once consumed, trigger an inflammatory response inside your arteries. Not occasionally, every time. And here is the part that matters most for anyone over 50. The aging cardiovascular system is already operating under increased inflammatory load. Arterial walls are already less elastic than they were at 30. The endothelium, the thin cellular lining of your blood vessels, is already more susceptible to damage. You are not 25, your body does not recover from the same insults with the same efficiency. What your arteries could process and repair in your 30s, they are storing in your 50s and 60s. A 2018 study from the University of the Basque Country found that regular consumption of oxidized lipids, which is exactly what heated seed oils produce, was directly associated with accelerated arterial aging, impaired endothelial function, and increased markers of systemic inflammation in adults over 50, not in people who were already sick, in otherwise healthy adults. Eating food they believed was good for them. Now, let us talk about what this oil is doing specifically inside your arteries. I want to give you the biology, not to overwhelm you, but because understanding what is actually happening inside your body is what makes this information impossible to dismiss and impossible to forget. Your arteries are not passive pipes. They are living tissue, dynamic, responsive, covered on their inner surface by a layer of cells called the endothelium, one of the most metabolically active tissues in the human body. The endothelium regulates blood flow, controls inflammation, manages clotting, and produces nitric oxide, the compound responsible for keeping your blood vessels relaxed, flexible, and open. When the endothelium is healthy, your cardiovascular system is healthy. When the endothelium is under chronic inflammatory stress, everything downstream is compromised. Here is what oxidized seed oils do to that tissue. When aldehydes, the compounds generated when these oils are heated, enter the bloodstream, they attach to proteins and lipids in the arterial wall. This process is called lipid peroxidation. It generates a cascade of inflammatory signals that the endothelium responds to as a threat. The initial response is protective. The body tries to repair the damage, but when this happens repeatedly, meal after meal, year after year, the repair response becomes the problem. Immune cells are recruited to the site of inflammation. Foam cells form. Plaque begins to accumulate. This is the beginning of atherosclerosis, the progressive narrowing and hardening of the arteries that underlies most heart attacks and strokes. And it does not begin with a dramatic event. It begins with breakfast. There is a second mechanism worth understanding. These oils are extremely high in omega-6 fatty acids, specifically linoleic acid. The human body requires a balance of omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids to regulate inflammation properly. In a traditional diet, the kind of diet human beings ate for thousands of years before industrial food processing, that ratio was approximately 4:1. 4 parts omega-6 to 1 part omega-3 in the modern diet, dominated by seed oils in almost every processed food, every restaurant kitchen, every bottle on the supermarket shelf. That ratio has shifted to approximately 20:1, some researchers estimate. It is now closer to 25:1 in heavy consumers. This imbalance does not just increase inflammation. It dysregulates the body's entire inflammatory response system, making it harder to resolve inflammation once it starts, and easier to trigger it with smaller and smaller provocations. Your body becomes, effectively, chronically inflamed, not from a single meal, from decades of a ratio that was never supposed to be this far out of balance. A 2021 review published in the journal Nutrients found that elevated linoleic acid consumption was independently associated with increased risk of coronary artery disease, type 2 diabetes, obesity, and all cause mortality in adults over 50 every one of those conditions, from the oil you were told was heart healthy. I want to be careful here. I am not asking you to believe that there was a room somewhere with people sitting around a table deciding to poison the population. It is not that simple. It never is. But I am asking you to look clearly at what happened. In the 1950s and 1960s, the vegetable oil industry was facing a problem. Their products, largely derived from industrial byproducts of cotton and soybean processing, had limited market penetration. People cooked with butter, lard, and tallow, traditional fats. Fats that had been used for centuries without the modern epidemic of cardiovascular disease that now defines Western health. Then Ansel Keys published his flawed study, and the industry moved. The Sugar Research Foundation, yes, the sugar industry, funded research in the 1960s specifically designed to shift the focus of cardiovascular disease research away from sugar and toward fat. Documents uncovered by researchers at the University of California, San Francisco, and published in JAMA Internal Medicine in 2016 showed that this funding directly shaped the dietary guidelines that pointed Americans toward vegetable oils and away from saturated fat. This is not a conspiracy theory. These are internal documents, published in a peer-reviewed medical journal. In 2016, the American Heart Association, the organization whose endorsement shaped dietary choices for millions, received significant funding from Procter & Gamble, the manufacturer of Crisco, one of the first industrially produced vegetable shortening products, beginning in the 1940s. The dietary guidelines that followed, the heart-healthy labels that appeared, the reformulation of every processed food to feature vegetable oils, none of this happened in a vacuum. It happened in an environment where the financial interests of specific industries were deeply entangled with the institutions that were supposed to be giving you neutral, evidence-based guidance about what to eat. You were not misinformed by accident. You were misinformed systematically. By institutions you trusted, using science that was funded to reach predetermined conclusions. And the cost of that misinformation, measured in arterial damage, in cardiovascular events, in the quiet biological aging of people who were doing exactly what they were told, is incalculable. I'm not saying this to make you angry. I'm saying this so that the next time someone tells you that the science is settled, that the guidelines are trustworthy, that the label on the bottle is telling you the truth, you remember this moment. And you ask the question that protects you. Who funded the study? Now, here is what your kitchen actually needs. 3 oils, each one backed by decades of genuine, unconflicted research, each one used by the longest-living populations on Earth, each one accessible, affordable, and, unlike what you have been using, stable enough at cooking temperatures to nourish rather than damage. This is the most researched dietary fat in human history, and the research is not subtle. A landmark study from the University of Athens, published in Clinical Nutrition, followed 840 adults over the age of 65 for 3 years. Those who consumed a minimum of 4 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil daily showed a 37% lower incidence of sarcopenia, age-related muscle loss, compared to those who rarely consumed it 37% from oil. But the cardiovascular benefits are what matter most for today's conversation. Extra virgin olive oil contains a compound called olecanthal, a natural polyphenol that functions in your body almost identically to ibuprofen. It inhibits the same inflammatory enzymes, COX-1 and COX-2, that prescription anti-inflammatory medications target, without the gastric bleeding, without the kidney strain, without the cardiovascular risk associated with long-term NSAID use. It also contains oleic acid, a monounsaturated fat that is chemically stable at cooking temperatures. When you heat extra virgin olive oil, it does not generate the same cascade of aldehydes and lipid peroxides that seed oils produce. It remains largely what it was before you heated it. This is not a small distinction. This is the fundamental difference between an oil that ages your arteries and one that protects them. Use it for everything. Sautéing, roasting, dressing, drizzling. 4 tablespoons daily is the research-backed minimum for cardiovascular benefit. That is approximately 1/3 of a cup, less than you might think, more than most people currently use. Buy extra virgin. Not light olive oil, not pure olive oil. Extra virgin, the only grade that retains the full polyphenol content responsible for its protective effects. The label matters. The grade matters. Anything less is a different product. For decades, coconut oil was on the list of oils to avoid. High in saturated fat. Bad for the heart. Put it down. Walk away. Sound familiar? The same framework that demonized butter and animal fat. The framework we now know was built on cherry-picked, industry-funded science, was the framework that put coconut oil on the avoid list. Here is what that framework missed. The saturated fat in coconut oil is primarily medium-chain triglycerides, MCTs. And MCTs behave differently in the body than the long-chain saturated fats in animal products. MCTs are absorbed directly into the portal vein and transported to the liver, where they are converted rapidly into ketones, a clean and efficient fuel source for the brain, the heart, and the muscles. They do not require the bile acid processing that long-chain fats require. They are not stored as readily in adipose tissue, and they do not generate the same inflammatory response. A 2018 study published in the BMJ Open found that coconut oil consumption was associated with significantly higher HDL, the protective cholesterol, compared to both butter and olive oil. Higher HDL is one of the most reliable markers of reduced cardiovascular risk. Coconut oil is also one of the most heat-stable cooking oils available, with a smoke point high enough for most cooking applications, and a chemical stability that prevents the oxidation cascade that makes seed oils so damaging at temperature. Use it for high-heat cooking, for roasting, for any application where you need an oil that can withstand genuine heat without breaking down. And for those of you watching from Caribbean or West African communities, this is not a new discovery. Your grandmother knew. They cooked with coconut. They cooked with palm. They used traditional fats that their grandmothers before them had used. The instruction to replace those fats with vegetable oil was not given to you by someone who understood your food traditions. It was given to you by a food industry that needed a market. Before you close this video, stay with me on this one, because this is the oil, or rather, the fat, that generated the most fear, and it deserves the most careful rehabilitation. Butter has been used by human beings for at least 10,000 years. Ghee, clarified butter, with the milk solids removed, has been used in Ayurvedic medicine for over 3,000 years as both a cooking fat and a healing compound. Neither of these fats produce the epidemic of cardiovascular disease that defines modern Western health. The epidemic arrived after the replacement, after the butter was thrown away, and the vegetable oil moved in. Grass-fed butter specifically, from cows that grazed on pasture rather than grain-fed in feedlots, contains vitamin K2, the nutrient that directs calcium into bones rather than arteries, directly reducing arterial calcification, conjugated linoleic acid, CLA, a naturally occurring fatty acid that research has associated with reduced body fat, improved insulin sensitivity, and anti-inflammatory effects. Butyrate, a short-chain fatty acid that feeds the cells lining your colon, reduces gut inflammation, and has been linked to improved metabolic health. And a fat-soluble vitamin profile, a D, E, and K, that is largely absent from seed oils entirely. Ghee carries all of these benefits with the additional advantage of being completely lactose and casein-free, making it appropriate for people who are sensitive to dairy. It has a high smoke point, higher than butter, making it stable for most cooking applications. And it has been used by some of the healthiest, longest-living populations in Asia and the Middle East for longer than any vegetable oil has existed. Use grass-fed butter for low to medium heat cooking, for finishing dishes, for the kind of richness that no vegetable oil has ever genuinely replicated. Use ghee for higher heat, for roasting, for any application where you need the stability of a traditional fat without the dairy sensitivity concern. Here is what to do this week, not in 6 months. This week, step 1, open your kitchen cupboard. Find the vegetable oil, the sunflower oil, canola oil, the corn oil, the generic bottle that says vegetable oil, put it aside. Not in the bin necessarily. If it helps, use what remains for non-cooking purposes. But stop cooking with it today. Step 2. Replace it with extra virgin olive oil for everyday cooking, dressings, and lower heat applications. Step 3. Add coconut oil for high heat cooking, stir-frying, roasting, anything above medium heat. Step 4. Bring grass-fed butter or ghee back to your kitchen. Use it without guilt. Use it understanding that what you were told about it was shaped by interests that were never primarily interested in your health. Step 5. Start reading labels on every processed food in your home. Seed oils appear in almost everything: biscuits, crackers, sauces, condiments, ready meals, snack foods. The swap in your kitchen is important. The awareness of what is in packaged food is equally important. This is not a complicated protocol. It is a return to the fats that human bodies evolved alongside, that your grandparents used without a second thought, that the food industry spent 60 years convincing you were dangerous. They were not dangerous. The replacement was. Everything I have shared with you today, the science, the history, the industry influence, the practical swap, is one piece of a much larger picture. I have a book that carries this work further. The 50 Forgotten Remedies the Modern World Wants You to Ignore. 50 Natural Interventions, clinically supported, historically validated, that the modern medical and food system has quietly sidelined. The cooking fats your grandparents used are in that picture. The remedies they paired them with are in this book, on the largest possible scale. And understanding how it works in the boardroom helps you recognize how it works in your own life. The book is linked in the description below. It's offered on a pay-what-you-want basis, because the information in it should not be locked behind a price that puts it out of reach. Pay what it is worth to you. And if it changes something, if it protects you or someone you love, then it was worth far more than whatever you paid. I want to tell you about 2 people. The first, I will call her Pauline, 68 years old. Caribbean background, living in the United Kingdom for 30 years. Pauline had been managing elevated cholesterol and borderline high blood pressure for 12 years. Her doctor had discussed medication twice. She had resisted, not from stubbornness, but from an instinct that something upstream was being missed. When we spoke, the first thing I noticed was her kitchen: 3 bottles of sunflower oil, a bottle of vegetable oil, cooking spray, which is almost entirely seed oil in aerosol form. Butter had not been in her kitchen for 20 years. She had followed the guidelines faithfully. We made one change. A single, clear, specific change. Every seed oil came out. Extra virgin olive oil and coconut oil went in. Grass-fed butter returned to her refrigerator for the first time in 2 decades. 14 weeks later, her LDL had dropped. Her HDL had risen significantly. Her blood pressure readings had stabilized to a range her doctor described as no longer concerning. Her doctor asked what medication she had started. She had started none. She had stopped something instead. The second, I will call him Cornelius, 72, Nigerian background, living in London. Cornelius had experienced 2 minor cardiac events in 5 years. Both times he had been reviewed, medicated, and discharged with dietary advice that included avoiding saturated fat and using heart-healthy vegetable oil. He followed that advice. He had his 3rd event 8 months later. It was his cardiologist's registrar, a young doctor who had been reading the emerging research on seed oils and cardiovascular inflammation, who finally asked the question nobody had asked before. What oil are you cooking with? The answer was sunflower oil. Every day. For 15 years, on medical advice, Cornelius is now 74. He cooks with olive oil and ghee. His inflammatory markers are the lowest they have been in a decade. He walks every morning. He tends a small garden. He told me recently, with a quiet fury that I completely understood, that nobody in 15 years of medical appointments had asked him that question. Not one person. What oil are you cooking with? Before this video ends, I want to ask you something. Think of one person in your life right now. A parent, a sibling, a friend, someone who has been faithfully cooking with vegetable oil, following the guidelines, doing what they were told, while managing cholesterol or blood pressure or inflammation that their doctor has addressed with medication but never traced to its source. Share this video with them today, not next week, today. Because Cornelius's story should not still be happening in 2025, because the question of what oil you are cooking with should not be the rarest question in cardiology, because the information in this video is not new. It has simply not been reaching the people who need it, until now. If this video helped you, give it a like. It tells the algorithm to carry this further. To the people still cooking with the oil they were told was safe, still following the guidelines that were shaped by the industry that sold them the product, subscribe to the Hidden Truths Life, because this is one truth among many that they have been slow to tell you, and we are only just beginning. The 50 forgotten remedies the modern world wants you to ignore. The link is in the description right now. Everything in this video is one chapter of a much larger story. Come get the rest of it. The end. Disclaimer. The information in this video is for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional before making changes to your diet, especially if you have existing health conditions or are on medication. The Hidden Truths Life assumes no responsibility for actions taken based on this content.